Steve, with all the uncertainties plaguing Tesla, what would you say to the company's shareholders?
Well, Tesla's certainly the gift that keeps on giving to people who like to talk about markets, because there's no shortage of issues to keep discussing. I won't rehash all of them, but of course the most recent set of them stems from Mr. Musk's now infamous tweet saying that he was looking at taking the company private at 420, and the secondary one that says financing secured. For better or for worse, the SEC's is having a look-see at what those tweets really mean, whether there was adequate disclosure, and then there was the subsequent story in the Times where Mr. Musk seemed fearful. And I have had people, in discussing the stock, ask me, do you think this guy seems stable? I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to weigh in on him, but it is very unusual for a company manager to be reveal that much of himself through his personality and through some of the troubles he's going through. Usually what you're looking to see is sort of the steadfast captain of the ship, and the company sailing on from there with a dedicated crew behind him. Tesla's very unusual because you really don't know who's behind Mr. Musk. He's got multiple companies, and he seems to be really the main man at the main operating company, which is Tesla. The question gets asked, who's his Sheryl Sandberg? Who is his Eric Schmidt? Even Apple, which under Steve Jobs appeared to be a one-man operation, wasn't. You knew who was running Pixar. You knew who was doing the design on the iPhones. And it's rare for the market really not to be able to name, at a glance, the supporting characters who are supporting this CEO. And as a result, the stock's seen some wild activities. It rallied up. It never really approached the 420 number, but that's normal because even in any risk-arb situation, you don't, if the deal is at $50 a share, you rarely see the company trade right to $50 a share. It trades at some discount to that because there's always execution risk in a deal, whether it's just timing or whether there's regulatory, whatever. And in the case of Tesla, where it wasn't clear where that funding was secured, the market really, even at its best, gave it an appropriate discount to that 420 number. You eventually then, after that somewhat strange New York Times interview and the stories that the SEC was investigating, the stock fell below 300, but only briefly because, remember also, there's very large short interest in Tesla, and so it's tough to sustain a real downtick until or unless some fundamental holders start selling out. And the latest uptick we've seen was that somehow Morgan Stanley has it now on its restricted list. Usually restricted lists are supposed to stay private, but things seem to leak when it comes to this company. And that could indicate that they may be, one theory is that Morgan Stanley is representing a potential buyer of the company. Very hard to say. This stuff is meant to stay private and for a good reason. But nothing is really ever normal with this company. And I guess what it comes down to is I still treat Tesla as the faith-based stock. And you may say, well, what do you mean by that? And realistically, people have inordinate faith in this company, the true believers. And you do have true believers, and their faith is almost religious, for lack of a better word. Try dissuading someone of their religious faith and try dissuading a true Tesla believer on their faith in that company and Mr. Musk. And at no point, although I've been somewhat skeptical about the stock price as it got into the mid 350 range, I do certainly believe that there is a superior product and one that does have remarkable potential, but how much of that potential is being priced in? And as we lead to that faith base, that actually raises a big problem in terms of taking the company private. To be a private company, they would have to get their shareholder list down below 300 names. How do you do that? When you have people, and many of them came out and said, I'm not a seller at any price. I'm not a seller until it gets over 500. well, what kind of premium is required to shake enough holders out to get the stock price to get this thing private? What price is required? And if so, if that price is north of 420, where it wasn't really obvious that there's the financing to do that deal, who's paying 480, 500? I don't know what that number is, and that's for the investment bankers to decide, and whether the financing is available. So what I would say here is there's still a lot of risk in this, and if you're a true believer, you're just going to dismiss me, and go ahead. But I think for those people who let's say maybe believe in the product, but not necessarily that the stock price is worth infinity. I think what you get into is you have a situation where you have a CEO who's clearly seeing a lot of the stress of the job. You're in a situation now where cash is a problem, even at current operating levels, let alone trying to raise enough of it to go private. You're hearing anecdotes about suppliers pulling back their lines of credit and worries about them getting paid. If this were any normal company with a more normal situation where you had a stressed out CEO who seems to be in need of a good rest, that's having real trouble paying its bills, it's having real trouble meeting its delivery targets, this stock would be getting clobbered. But somehow, through the force of that leader's personality, it remains a very compelling story. The one piece of advice I can say is, don't risk anything more than you can afford to lose. There's real upside in this story. There's real downside in this story. You can make your decisions accordingly, but realize this is a very volatile stock. It moves very quickly. Be very wary about how much you're willing to invest in this company on the long or short side. Without regard, you really have to have real regard for the amount of risk that you're taking on.